Thanks, everyone. This is the Ask April and Cindy series, and I'm April.
And I'm Cindy, and this is the first of our series of travel tips, so welcome.
For joining us tonight. We're talking about traveling the USA by train. So we're welcoming travel ninja Cindy Cohen. So thank you, Cindy, for coming on board and sharing about traveling the United States by train.
Sure, thanks for having us.
So let's talk train travel. Why travel by train?
Well, I love train travel. That's just a personal thing. I love the slower form of travel, and that it's budget friendly typically. But a lot of people want to travel by train. Sometimes it's because they don't like to fly. It's sometimes more economical to travel by train. And like if you compare train travel to air travel, there's a huge difference in both your seat and your accommodations, as well as there's you don't have to wait in line at security. It's much easier to, get on board. You have different accommodations for your luggage. It's more comfortable. And then if you're traveling by car, train travel is definitely better than driving, in that you're not behind the wheel. So you don't have to have your folks on the road. You can book or talk to your partners and have a more enjoyable, relaxed trip. I mean, there's lots of reasons to travel by train. I personally enjoy it a lot just for all of those reasons. But some people actually opt to travel by train, as I said, because they're not fans of air travel or other options. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you can do in the US around travel in train.
Great. So where can you travel by train?
The U.S. has a huge network, and the Amtrak's the main source of train travel. There are a few other local train systems that can go from different places on the East Coast, and even here in the Southern California area, there are smaller train systems and local trains and subways and so forth. But with the Amtrak system, you can go clear across country. There's several coast-to-coast options. Traveling from New York to Los Angeles, for example, or New York to Seattle. And most of those go via Chicago, but you can also go down through New Orleans. There's East Coast trains that go from New York to Miami. And on the West Coast here, we have, from San Diego all the way up to Seattle. And those are beautiful train rides. There's tons of ways to travel and places you can go on the smaller network. My favorite train is the Southwest Chief, which goes from Chicago to Los Angeles. But that particular train, and I've ridden that that train goes through the Santa Fe Railroad, the famous Route 66, through Indian Country, and then there is an option to stop off at the Grand Canyon through the Southwest East. I personally travel that because my family, my brother lived in Texas and my Tucson, and I travel that train from Texas, from my brother's place, all the way to Los Angeles with a nice stopover in Tucson to see my son. So it's really, there's a lot of great options to travel via train just in the U.S.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So what is the trip like on board once you get on the train?
Well, each one, I didn't know this because I've done a lot of train travel here in California and on the West Coast, but a couple of years ago, I did my year of travel. I did a lot of travel in the U.S. on train on the East Coast and other parts, and I didn't know how very different the personalities are from the different trains that travel. So most of them are similar. Amtrak has a pretty consistent class of service of the trains, but there's definitely a different personality, which is interesting. Having traveled quite a bit, I learned that the staff on the train, they work like, I want to say 3 to 5 days in a row. So they work the entire trip and back typically. So if you're on a cross-country train, that train it's 3 days to get from one end of the country to the other. And so they're going to work the full 6 days. You have the same crew all the way through. And then they'll switch over. So as you can imagine, having the same crew, set of people, there is definitely a personality throughout the train, which is interesting. And then on board, unlike your air flight, the seats are bigger, they're wider, they're much more comfortable, they recline more like a recliner at home. Most of the trains have Wi-Fi available. All of the trains have power. So right there at your own seat, you can sit and, work or plug in your devices. I watch movies. There's a tray like you have on a flight. But there's also other rooms on the train. So often there's a lounge area or a windowed train, which is just for people to go and sit in. Those have floor to ceiling windows on the side. You can just sit in those seats and watch the scenery go by. And then there's typically a cafe car, which is just what it sounds, sort of a snack bar with some in it. You can go and sit there. There's other like loungy areas, as well as a dining car on the longer distance ones, where you can actually reserve a spot and have a sit down meal in the dining car as well. So one of the things I do really enjoy about long distance train travel and like long distance car travel is that you can actually get up and walk around. So, you might sit in your seat for an hour or two, and then you get tired of sitting, as you do, and you can get up and take a little, take your snacks or a card game and go sit in the lounge area and play for a little while, and just kind of change your own scenery along the way from where you sit, which makes the trip a lot more enjoyable. There's several options of where to travel on board, and I know that as you're walking through the train, you'll see that there's different classes of service as well. And I do actually enjoy the people that you meet on the train. You're going to meet locals typically as well, especially in between the smaller distances. So I have traveled from, I think the longest one was from Chicago back to Los Angeles. That's the longest time I was on the train. And I'm trying to think if that is true, but it sounds like it is. There won't be as many people that are taking the full distance with you, but there'll be people getting on and off, taking smaller distance, train rides as well. And so you meet a lot of different people, everybody from, somebody who's visiting family, as well as somebody who may be just traveling back and forth for the weekend. I met, students coming back and forth from college, and they're only going a short distance because they don't live that far. As well as like people who are like myself going clear across country. So there's so much excitement that happens on the train with the people coming on and off and the different things that are happening. I really enjoy it. So
yeah, that sounds interesting. So do you always ride in coach, and what are some of the other options?
I almost always ride in coach, and I say that because I've tried almost everything. I've not booked a room. They have suites where there's sort of like a place to sleep, as well as like a bathroom and so forth. They have bigger rooms. I have rented what they call a roomette, which is it's really just two seats that fold down and turn into kind of like bunk beds, so two people can sleep in there and you have your own space. All of those options of upping to a room or sleeping car are very expensive. They go from like a typical train ride that maybe you're spending $150 on to go across, maybe from Los Angeles to Texas. If you opt to get a room or a roomette, it's now $500 or $600. So it's a lot more to get the room. And I've done it, like I said, one time, and I wouldn't do it again. The roomette actually feels smaller than the seat I have in coach. Because you're stuck in the sort of like room that has a door that closes. So you have privacy. So if that's an issue for you, that's for sure happening in those rooms or the roomette. You get your own private space, but you don't really have as much spread out space, if that makes sense.
Right.
But the other option on most Amtrak trains is business class, and that is not that much more expensive. It's just usually, I want to say like a 10% or 15% up on the cost of your train ride. And the difference there, the seats are exactly the same as they are in coach. I think they provide things like a newspaper and free coffee service in there. But the difference for me is the people. It doesn't typically get as crowded in those areas. So
Right.
if I used to travel quite a bit via Amtrak for work. I would travel to down south here once or twice a week to an office. And if I wanted to work on the train, it was a lot better if I was in the business class, just because there was less people moving around and less noise going on. And if you want to have a little bit more space and the train is less empty, upping for that business class is a good option. Absolutely a good option for giving yourself a little bit of privacy. But you lose all of the fun, exciting stuff that happens in coach, because I have all kinds of interesting stories of people that I've seen that have happened on that train. I've watched people, meet, date. Somebody found out that they liked each other and they end up sitting behind me, and it's quite amusing. Or
Oh my
there's
gosh.
kids running around because you're on the train for a day and a half, so lots of fun stuff happens with
Right.
that kind of thing. So I enjoy the people watching aspect of being just in coach with everybody else. And like I said, unless I was trying to work, and then the business class is definitely an option. So there are lots of great options. And I do want to mention that the downstairs, most of the trains here on the West Coast, and I want to say most of the other trains that are going from Chicago and so forth, they're double decker. So
Oh.
the coach class is up high, which is great for your sightseeing. And then on the very first floor, there's a number of cars that have seating, but that seating is reserved for people that have trouble navigating the stairs. So I want to say it's reserved just for disabled folks. It's also for elderly or anybody who doesn't want to go up the stairs. So you have
Right.
to ask to sit down there. The stairs, there's not very many, it's just a few, but navigating up those stairs back and forth and getting off might be difficult for somebody. So they do reserve those. And if you're traveling with somebody who has that type of issue, you can sit down there as well. But those are the only people that typically sit in the downstairs. It's a small amount of seats. The rest of them are all upstairs, which are, as I said, it's better for the view because you have a better view of what's going on.
Right. So what about luggage? Are there limits on luggage or size restrictions?
That's one of the beautiful things now that airlines are charging so much for luggage. You can bring 3 pieces of luggage of just about any size. I've never had them actually check the size of my luggage on the train at no additional cost. So if you're traveling with quite a bit of gear, it's always a good way to go is via train travel. I did not know this until I tried it in Texas, because typically I don't check my luggage. Usually I'm traveling pretty light. But coming back from my family one Christmas, I had an extra piece of luggage and I thought, oh, I'll just check it. The train does do that. They'll take your luggage and put it in a luggage car and carry it for you. Otherwise, you need to carry your own luggage on and off the train. But you do need to arrive an hour early to do that, which is something I didn't know, because typically with train travel, you can pretty much show up as they're boarding, which is typically about 15 minutes to 20 minutes before the train takes off. So you don't have to, like an airline, get there so early.
Right.
But we had arrived, maybe a half an hour, 40 minutes or so before the train, and they were not able to
Oh
I
no.
wasn't able to check my piece of luggage, so I had to lug my large suitcase full of stuff
Oh,
that I took back from my mom onto the train. But again, it's not a huge deal. There are spaces on the bottom floor for luggage, so you can just put it down there, and then you go upstairs with the small piece of luggage that you want to have by your seat. So there's not a problem there, but you can also bring animals. People bring pets pretty easily. I think you just need to get a special, you need to know. You can also, a lot of people bring bikes. I see a lot of folks riding with bikes. Bikes are limited on the train. So definitely make sure you purchase the bike. I think it's an extra $20 or $30 to bring your bike along. But make sure you purchase that with your ticket ahead of time, because then they do run out of space for bikes.
okay.
Because they have a special car where they put those, because they have to secure them so that they don't go flying all over the place during the ride.
Oh,
And some people do ask me about the safety of your luggage on the train. I've had people ask if that's a concern, and I have absolutely never had an issue with that. Um, because for the larger pieces of luggage, you can just leave them downstairs and then you go up into your seat. So there's a little anxiety, right? Because other people are
Yeah,
walking by your
right.
luggage. But again, I've never really had an issue with that. I do, of course, keep things like, if I have my laptop or I have camera equipment or anything else that would usually come upstairs with me right by my seat. Um, but even when I bring that kind of stuff up by my seat, unless it's my purse or something, I will leave those things right there in the seat when I walk to the cafe car and so forth. I've never had anybody take anything. I am also cautious about making my movements about the car when the train is in movement.
Mm,
So if we're about to stop, I will just stay put, just because mentally that's something I have in my head. It's a little difficult to take something from you on a train that's moving, because if it's
right.
missing, it'll be a lot easier to find the person who came and took something. But if the train is just getting ready to stop, it's pretty easy for somebody to reach over and grab your bag and then get off the train and you've lost that. So I do pay attention to that. But again, I've never had an issue, and I've never seen anybody have an issue with having anything stolen on the train or any other security issues on the train. So it's been pretty safe.
Oh, great. So what would you recommend to bring on a long train trip or any
Oh,
train trip?
my number one recommendation is bring your own food. As I
Oh,
said,
okay.
they all have a cafe car and they all have the longer distance ones do have a dining car, and they do offer options to eat meals. But in my experience, those meals are not too fantastic. They're just pretty mediocre. Um, I mean, they're going to be like flight, airline food as well. It's not the best food, but you can bring your own food. And I almost always do that. I mean, there have been a few times where I've, forgotten or didn't have opportunity. So I will have a meal at the dining car. Um, but I don't enjoy that. Again, the cafe food in the cafe, it's going to be things like chips and soda, and then maybe a hot dog that they microwave or a pizza that's warmed up in the microwave. So those aren't really good.
Right.
And then the meals in the dining car, I don't think we're cooking those. I think those are also warmed up the same way as well. It's different kinds of food, like they might have like enchiladas or some sort of pasta or a salad. It's pretty pricey for what it is in the dining car. So I pack a snack. I typically will pack, a sort of like a picnic lunch for myself, and I enjoy the whole aspect. The other cool thing about train travel is that you bring your own. Now they don't encourage you to bring your own wine, beer, or anything on the train. Would prefer you obviously to put that at the cafe car, because they do sell all of those things in the cafe car. And I've never had it, as long as you're not bringing out a wine bottle or bringing out, a vodka bottle or beer bottles or something crazy. I've never had an issue with just sort of having my own drinks as well as my own snacks on the train. They don't have any issue with you having your own snacks. Most people bring snacks so that you're not purchasing, a $2 bag of chips downstairs. So I would encourage people to bring that. You can also bring things like, if you're traveling with a partner, bringing things like, card games or anything you can play on that little tray that's in front of you. Those are fun to have. I bring a book to read. I bring my Kindle and I watch movies. You do need to check sure that your train will have Wi-Fi if you want that available, if you need it. Otherwise, like a flight, you'd have to have the movie downloaded so you can watch that. Also, typically if I'm doing a long distance travel, I will bring my own blanket and pillow. It just makes that sitting in that car or seat a little bit more enjoyable. Definitely a
Right.
blanket, just because like a flight, the air that's circulating can get kind of chilly, especially if you're trying to sleep. And I think that's about it. I mean, I typically, if it's a long distance, you're going to need something to do. So I bring quite a bit of stuff to keep myself busy and occupied. And then I'll bring a little bag full of, treats, my sort of picnic lunch to have throughout the trip. And even on shorter trips, I do that as well. So I certainly encourage that.
Right. So what would you say is your favorite thing about traveling by train?
I do really enjoy the slowness of the train. I like the fact that I can, have get my snack out and look at that and then go sit in the lounge car and enjoy the scenery. I have seen some spectacular scenery as I've, traveled across the country. Stuff that I wouldn't probably be able to see if I was driving because you're focused on
Right.
the road. And you can really just sort of take it all in. And then finally, my favorite thing about the train travel is the station. So if you're going to a small place, there might not be a very big station, but even the smaller stations are quaint and cute. Little train stations when they're outdoors, as well as the big train stations like in Chicago, Grand Central Station in New York. Union Station here in Los Angeles. Most big cities have a big historical train station, which is quite spectacular to be able to get off that train and then walk into a venue like that, which makes the travel more it's luxurious than it would be.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
So
That's it.
yeah, unless you have a travel mishap.
Oh, that's a good one. A mishap. Yeah. There, the only thing I will say, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that train travel in the US, despite the fact that they typically start out on time, if you're taking one of those long distance train rides, they're going to potentially be late. Now,
Okay.
um, you may not, if you're taking from Chicago to Los Angeles and you're only taking the short ride from Chicago to a small city outside of Chicago or just a few stops away, that will probably be on time. But once you get all the way to Texas, or you're a day and a half into the trip, even if you get on in Texas, it might be late by that time. So a train that is going 3 days, so you can imagine any cross country train that takes 3 days to go from New York to, say, Los Angeles or Seattle, being late for that train is relative, right? So it might be
Right,
an
right.
hour late and it might be 2 hours late or 6 hours late. And that's all depending on like what happens throughout that 3 day train travel. So the Amtrak is really good at letting you know. They have a system when you buy a ticket, you can get text messages to keep you updated as to what's happening. And I have this experience when I come from Texas to Los Angeles and in Tucson, because Tucson's sort of right in the middle of the two. So that
Right.
train will sometimes be late to take off
Oh,
just
okay.
because it's in the middle, so it might be a few hours before it may be an hour or 45 minutes late to take off, and then we'll arrive a few minutes later, an hour late. The worst situation was on the East Coast, and I think I was going to New Orleans from somewhere like New York or Pittsburgh, and that train, we were 10 hours late. It was the
Oh,
worst train situation we had. But in that particular situation, it was no one's fault. There was actually some technical difficulties with the train. We were stuck on the track waiting for a replacement engine for
oh my
hours.
gosh.
For just hours. And for me, I was in no real hurry. I mean, obviously you want to get where you want to get, but I didn't have an appointment or somebody waiting for me at the other end. But I felt really bad for a lot of the other travelers, especially the ones that were on it for such a short distance. They were stuck on the train. Maybe they were only taking like a 4 hour train ride and it ended up being a 14-hour train ride.
Right.
Whereas mine was a 2 day train ride and it was taking me, 10 more hours, which is a lot, but
Yeah.
it's all relative, as I said, right? So based on how long it is. That's only happened once, and I've heard other people tell those stories. But Amtrak again was really good about that. All I had to do was send them a message, and they gave me a refund for my ticket. And I
Oh,
had heard
wow.
that most most of the time that happens. And they're also, by the way, really good about changing your ticket, something that airlines are not good about. I have purchased train tickets for, like next weekend, and then decide I want to go the weekend after. I just call Amtrak and they will often just swap it. If there's another ticket
Oh,
available at that
wow.
price, there's usually no penalty for that. They just swap it. Um, and that brings up another thing that I did learn too, is that Amtrak sets up certain prices for the same seat. So
Okay.
I wondered why, like my coach seat sometimes would be, I mean, I'm not kidding, it'll be like $34 to go to Tucson. So for $30, I can go to Tucson. But then if I look at it, at another time, it might say it's $90. And they're all
Oh,
the same seat. And why, I don't know. After talking to some of the folks on trains and so forth, I found out what happens is Amtrak sets aside a certain amount of seats on the train at the lowest price, and then a middle price, and then a higher price. They, again, all the same seats. So if you book early, you're going to get the lower price ones because those are going to go first. So it's literally a matter
right,
of booking
right.
early to get the lower tickets. And they have them early enough. And of course, like in the summertime, just like anything else, they go faster. So I found it helps if I book right away for the
Right.
flight or for the train travel, so that I can get the lowest price available. But then if you're swapping that seat, if there's not a low price, they will give it to you at the higher price, and then you just have to pay the difference. So still, that's the only penalty that I've ever had to pay, is when the cheaper
Price.
seat of
Right. The
uh,
difference. Right.
but those are pretty inexpensive. Yeah, pay the
Right.
difference. So
Yeah.